So one thing that I'm always looking for is a repeat of certain themes or messages or principles by multiple sources. Now, probably in the last year, there's been this running theme or message that I've heard from so many great leaders, great coaches, on the importance of awareness, like in particular, self-awareness. We've heard coaches like Shaka Smart discuss this, Dr. Michael Gervais, leadership coach Jennifer Garvey-Berger, like the list goes on. However, I think the model or framework that I'm resonating the most with for understanding and teaching self-awareness, the one that I appreciate the most, it's called Above and Below the Line. And it's taught by Jim Detmer and the organization, the Conscious Leadership Group. Now, the Conscious Leadership Group, they're an organization I came across well over a year ago. And they've worked with some of the world's top organizations and leaders and CEOs. When I first came across them, I instantly picked up their book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And honestly, it's incredible. So incredible that I'm currently rereading it, some parts actually for a third time. And I'm spending a month on each of the 15 commitments. You know, and there's one chapter per commitment. So I'm going through and working through each commitment one month at a time. And these are commitments they discuss not just in the book, but in their workshop that they work with leaders on. Now, to help us, though, to discuss their above the line and below the line framework for self-awareness, we just reached out to them. We said, hey, would one of your people be willing to come on and have a conversation with us? And that's what today's conversation is. It's Dolores Stevens, who is a coach with the Conscious Leadership Group, been there for many years, and she's come on to unpack some of their core principles, as well as to do a little work with Nate on a real situation that he's facing in coaching. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman. I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Sanderson today. Our mission here is simple. We want to help coaches become better leaders and build better team cultures. If you're interested in learning more about our work as leadership coaches and facilitators, or if you want to explore our online courses and books, head on over to tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com. While you're at tocculture.com, you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. It's got the notes to each episode of the podcast, our latest article, and discounts on our online courses. Now let's get started with our conversation with Dolores. Dolores, we are excited to have you. This podcast has been months in the planning. I've been diving into everything conscious leadership for probably about a year now. On my second time reading the book, I've listened to several of your podcasts that you all have been on. And so I'm excited to have this conversation. I want to start with, just from your perspective, what is conscious leadership? Because, I hear conscious leadership. I know some of our coaches are going to go, well, I've heard servant leadership. I've heard transformational leadership. Now we've got conscious leadership. I can't keep up, but give us a bit of a rundown of what is conscious leadership and maybe how it differs from servant leadership and transformational leadership, which are terms that they would be very familiar with.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you both, JP and Nate, for having me here. Really excited to explore with you both today. To offer a definition here for conscious leadership, I would say if we take each word independently, starting with conscious, we like to say to be conscious is to be present in a non-reactive, non-triggered way. So just really open to meet the moment. And sounds easier than it is, I think. And then the second piece with leadership, we like to say this is anyone who's willing to take responsibility for their impact in the world.
Why is it so hard for us just to be present, to be in the moment with the people that we're working with or interacting with, or even just with ourselves?
Yeah, it was a big awakening for me as I started to do this work and get really introspective around this. I think that kind of the first data point that's helpful to be aware of is that, like, as humans, we're only present in the present moment, really tuned in for maybe 0 to 4 seconds at a time. And then just naturally something happens. There's a siren that goes off outside. There's a thought that enters my head. I feel a pang of hunger and now I'm thinking about lunch. So and any number of things can kind of cause me to drift out of presence. And then naturally, of course, just throughout a conversation, I'll shift back in and choose to tune back into what's happening around me. but more often than not, we get hooked on our thoughts, and we end up kind of, you know, sometimes many miles from the present moment as we're like following a train of thought and, really lost in something that's either happened in the past or planning for the future. And so it takes real intentionality to drop in and remain kind of committed to arriving in the present moment.
Yeah, and that taking responsibility piece, you mentioned with the leadership aspect. A lot of people talk about leadership as having influence or whatever, but like what's that responsibility piece? What's so important about that?
Around this body of work, we've kind of broken out, 15 principles, 15 ways that we can shift back into the present moment and really step into our full um, capabilities and yeah, influence in the world. And the very first commitment we have is radical responsibility, and it's first because it really sets up. The first and second are really fundamental to the rest of the body of work. So step one, radical responsibility, or commitment one, and commitment two is curiosity, to kind of really commit to a curious state of being, and instead of righteousness, which is our opposing, the alternative. So with radical responsibility, I think it's inviting each person into like full agency, and to recognize ourselves and each others as fully capable and fully authors of our experience. And so we see that as really fundamental to being able to impact the world around us, our own microcosm, but then of course like expanding beyond that too.
I'm curious to ask you this question here. When you think about what successful conscious leadership looks like, I think in the coaching world in particular, because we're so oriented toward a final score or a record at the end of the year or our team's performance, that there's a tendency there to say, well, the ends, our outcomes are going to justify our means. And this seems
Mm,
to be a different approach. And even from, traditionally, when you look at like the original writing from Robert Greenleaf on servant leadership, the goal was to create more servants. The goal of
mm.
transformational leadership is to transform the lives of those we coach. But this doesn't necessarily seem to be as oriented toward the end, maybe as much as the process to get someplace. I wonder if you could just address that.
There can be an aspect of this work, and actually my bias is always towards like an end goal, and I love to kind of lock into what I'm achieving, or what the vision that a client might have as we're working together. So I like the idea of balancing both. And I think that there is like an emphasis on the practice and the process supporting moving in that direction. So you can still hold that intentionality of, wanting to have a great season, or hit a certain set of a certain target of goals you're trying to make, or whatever it might be. Um, but to keep kind of returning back to the means of getting there, and having that be a really powerful playbook for you to keep expanding. There's an expression, and I actually forget where it comes from, but something like, I don't know where we're going, but I know how to get there. And I love this idea of kind of having some, you might have that aspirational sense, but you hold it a little bit lightly, and you're really kind of in the present moment, navigating, the moment to moment situation that supports that aspiration. Yeah, and I'm actually just thinking of tennis players and top tennis pros, and how they always, I've heard some, I think it was Roger Federer spoke about this, and he really kind of keeps returning to, it's just a point and just in the moment. And of course he has an intentionality to win the match, but um but it's that process of just kind of moment to moment, re-arriving, letting go of whatever just happened, staying really yeah, focused on that practice, that I find really invigorating.
And I guess, again, from a coach's perspective, when we deal with an environment that is so emotionally charged, right? I mean, you've got the fans, you have the expectations and the pressure and the success and the failure and all the feels, that come with that. Um, why the emphasis on consciousness? Like sometimes I think about even the way we put those words together, servant leadership, servant first, right? And being conscious first. Why for a coach that's involved in a a highly competitive environment, like why does that matter if you're going to make a case for that approach?
That act of, returning to the present moment, working through triggers and reactivity. There's a portion of this that requires getting really aware of what triggers you, what kind of what buttons are there in there that get pushed. um, by developing all this awareness and kind of personal acceptance and freedom from that, you're actually much more free to be in the present moment, to deliver, to the very best and highest, your highest capability. So I think there's just a power in that level of presence and consciousness of your own, your own kind of tendencies, blind spots, and so on.
I'm curious if you've got conscious leadership, you've got unconscious leadership, and I'm curious what's unconscious leadership costing leaders today.
Uh,
And maybe you can share even from your own personal stories. Obviously, you made this shift. You made this shift into a more conscious leadership, and it's not like we're always making this shift. I know, but this work resonated with you, and so maybe you came to a realization that it was costing you something as a leader.
Yeah, so I would say that, unconscious leadership in some ways is just our default. We're running on our default, and there's nothing wrong with that. We've got all these, each individual has great traits that they're bringing to the table, and we tend to kind of overuse traits that we are most comfortable with, and maybe underuse others. And so there's nothing wrong with the way we do life necessarily. The cost, though, is that and this is often not always immediately apparent, but that we're often running from fear. There's some level of a little bit of reactivity in the system, kind of maybe we have a little bit of an agenda that's not stated fully. Yeah, we're not available for the present moment as a result. And some of my own experience, I worked actually in startups for a number of years prior to moving into coaching. And I, to be a leadership coach. And I found that I've loved the environment of a startup. It's like so aspirational. It's so, it can be a little bit chaotic, but there's so much energy kind of built up in the system. And it's a highly, it can be a space, it's an environment where it's like every day feels a little bit like do or die. Is this company going to continue to exist? And so it's such a ripe place for unconscious leadership to prevail, unless there's a real intentionality around, how am I showing up, and what am I bringing to the table, and how is fear in the system today? So it was, I didn't know what I was looking for when I discovered conscious leadership as a model, but I knew that the cost was very high for people's well-being, people's kind of capabilities, and ultimately they're very drama induced environments. When you have these high achieving environments that don't have some self-awareness, both the collective, the culture of the company or the team, but also the individual, a lot of drama ensues, and we put a lot of energy into the interpersonal dramas that go on instead of putting that energy into what we want to create in the world. So that was some of what drew me to conscious leadership, just that, like,
Mhm.
oh, there's a whole nother paradigm for how we could be addressing and looking at our own reactivity and working with others.
You all use a framework that you've
Mhm.
kind of been, circling around, which is this concept of above the line, below the line.
Yeah.
And for many of our listeners, they're going to think about above the line, below the line, in the context that I often speak about it, write about it, which is like behaviors that are above the line or acceptable or exceptional behaviors from athletes or leaders, and then below the line is unacceptable behavior. So there's a little bit of maybe some similarities, but could you speak to this idea around above the line, below the line? I think it's really what the conscious leadership group is really well known for, and it's obviously
Yeah.
maybe the starting point for a lot of your work with your clients, your teams, and organizations.
At any moment, we like to offer this very simple diagram, a horizontal line. And you can imagine that you're either above the line in a open, curious, trusting state of mind, or you're below the line in experiencing some reactivity, some sense that things should be different than they are, that yeah, there's a whole number of ways that drama can ensue when we're below the line. And this is, this a little bit of a spoiler alert, but we spend 95% of our time below the line as humans, give or take. And I like to say, even if you're doing this work really, intentionally around consciousness, maybe you spend 90% of your time below the line. It's not a huge margin that you can shift, because it's just part of our nature. So the question isn't, will I go below the line? Do I get reactive? It's, what do I do next? And so we like to invite people into exploring that world, and then supporting them in finding ways to shift, building the muscle to shift more easily back to the present moment, back to being with reality with a new level of resourcefulness available.
So just for the listeners here, again, we're taking baby steps into some of this, framework. What are some of the early symptoms? Like the first steps for me to start to recognize, oh, that maybe was what she means by below the line behavior.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, Nate, I was thinking, since you're thinking about maybe bringing an issue forward, we could even start playing with it now to start to explore how, we'll kind of use that as an anchor, if that sounds good to you. Yeah.
Yep, that sounds great. I have many issues to choose from.
Well, I'm really excited that you're willing to play here. So what's if you were to give me like a one-liner headline for what's going on, or you could use a couple sentences, but if we kind of crystallize what's the issue here, I'd love to, and then we'll explore above, below the line, and so on from there.
One of the challenges, we just started practice here this week, and so we've been in the preseason, which obviously there's a lot of planning for. And one thing that has been more challenging this year with my staff than years previously is it's just hard to get together. And I think by extension, communication becomes more difficult with my assistant coaches and lower level coaches and that sort of thing. So I've struggled to navigate that because I'm used to having more contact time with them, both in the preseason and now that we're started, just opportunities to collaborate together we just haven't had. And so I'm trying to figure that out.
And so is the issue, is the kind of headline here, like it's just hard to get this group of people together?
I think that's it. And I think, again, by extension, when we're not together, we just don't communicate as well. So I feel like as a coach, part of it is I'm not getting as many inputs, from my assistants as what maybe I have in the past to gain perspective and, what they're seeing and that sort of thing.
Okay, great. So yeah, it's hard to get this group together, and I'm not getting, we're not communicating as well. I'm not getting the inputs I want to support me in leading this team. So I'll offer this. We often use kind of a handout that'll enumerate ways that we're either above the line or below the line. It's a resource available on our website if anyone's curious to start to get reflective with this. There are behaviors, beliefs, statements we might, find ourselves, drifting to around any given issue. Complaining is often a great one. Like, so if I notice myself complaining about something and just clocking, what am I complaining about here around this issue? And is this, especially if there's a refrain, something I'm saying more frequently. Blaming is another kind of flag of when I'm below the line. I notice I might be, just finding fault and blame with others, with myself, with the world. And then, another one might be different ways I might seek to make it a little better, but not all the way. So kind of ease the situation for myself, the discomfort I feel, but not really solve the core issue. So I'm curious for you, if you just notice around this issue of it's hard to get this group together, we're not communicating well, and I'm not getting the input I want. When it comes to that, do you notice any complaining, blaming, kind of quick fixes showing up for you?
Well, I can do all of those things.
Great.
I mean, the refrain in my mind of just, just the frustration of like, can you just respond to this? Can you just answer this question? Can you, I don't know if I think I'm pretty good about keeping that in, and maybe that's not good. I don't know, but I'm certainly aware of that, when it happens. And I think, blaming, obviously, I mean, I can tell you reasons why everyone's so busy, and there's something to that that's both reality and maybe also blaming at the same time.
Yeah.
Primarily, our coaches have too many kids. I mean, that's the problem, right? So, like, and full-time jobs. I don't know what they're thinking. But yeah, I mean, all of those things certainly at times I'm falling into without question.
I hear there's a real visceral experience that's maybe not getting fully felt is the flag for me. Yeah, and there's some good complaining refrains here. So great. So it sounds over here like there's some real below the lineness, I'd say, with this issue. And again, like 95% of the time, we find ourselves below the line as humans. So there's no problem with that. And now we get to do the work and explore how are we being in relation to this. I want to take us kind of one step further into this process of exploring, and that is, in a full-blown coaching session, I might invite you onto the drama triangle, which is a tool we use to really heighten and support kind of seeing the pattern even more clearly. So this is, when we know we're below the line, we're in some sort of drama around an issue. So the issue, the team's not getting together, not communicating well, and there are three bases on the drama triangle. There's the villain, victim, and hero base. And actually, I started to hint at these three bases. So the villain is the one that does the blaming, blaming these full-time jobs and people aren't prioritizing this. The victim is usually complaining kind of at the effect of the situation. And then the hero is looking for that temporary fix. I'll give some examples of what a temporary fix might look like, but the hero is often just trying to get some temporary relief from being below the line. So it's a way we kind of buoy ourselves along. Even the idea of keeping that frustration in, that could be a way that you don't kind of rock the boat too much. Like, okay, I just won't say anything about this. Like, I know everyone's trying their best. That would be a good hero move. Like, they're trying really hard. I'm not going to voice, what's going on for me over here. Another might be to kind of disconnect from the issue. Like, okay, that's, didn't get what I wanted here. So I'm just going to go pour a glass of wine and watch TV or, something that really like gives me some relief from the whole thing that's stewing here for me. So it could be a total step away from the issue. It could be trying to hero other people or hero myself. Like, I'm trying really hard. I'm the one who's always trying to bring us together. Those are different hero moves.
When our staff would just couldn't find a date for everybody to get together, I'd just sigh and then like, okay, well, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure that I meet with everyone at some point individually, which I've done over the last, 6 weeks or whatever, which is something, but it's not the same as everyone being in the same room. And
Yeah.
so maybe that's an example of what you're describing there.
Yes, that's a great example of a hero move. I'm hearing that, especially that I'll do whatever it takes, and kind of an overextension on your part of, the effort to meet with each person. We often, with the drama triangle, invite people to have kind of a 2-minute rant. The benefit of that is you get to really, we get to see what base you jump between, what the pattern might look like. So if you want to really tap into this for a minute or two here, I'd love to hear a little more.
I think I can take this in two directions with the narratives that continue to swirl in my mind. I think
Yeah, great.
on a broader scale, in terms of just what we need to do to be effective at Mount Vernon in our basketball program. Like, we have to navigate a lot of challenges that are unique to our situation. So we have multi-sport kids and we have facility limitations and on and on and on. So because we have limited time in contact with kids, one of the things that's most important to me is alignment in our teaching, coaching, and curriculum. And that consistency from the varsity level all the way through second grade is something that we're striving to work towards, because I think that's the way that we have to be successful at Mount Vernon, if that makes sense. So when that breaks down, particularly with the level right below the varsity level, that's really frustrating, in terms of like how we teach or how we interact with kids or whatever those things might be. I think that's so important to me. That's probably why I've got triggers that are, tightly knit into some of those issues.
Yeah.
I think in a darker place, I probably wonder, like, well, geez, if we're too busy to even respond to a message, like what are we getting out of this person in, in the staff in general? Like, can I expect anything from them, or do we need to find somebody that has more capacity to do something to serve the program? More than just show up and be there for 2 hours or an hour and a half or whatever. Because I've also noticed that, like last year we had a change in staff, and then this year another change in staff, and my workload has gone up. I mean, even thinking about that hero example of, it's one thing to meet with a staff for 2 hours, but now when I have to have 6 separate meetings, that's 6 to 8 hours of my time that I didn't have to spend last year when we could find a place to get together. And I'm, again, hero, willing to absorb that, but I'm also tired. And like,
Yeah.
it's just meant more work for me, right? And so I don't know how long that's sustainable either.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I want to map a couple of the things I heard. And actually, I felt the real shift into you being willing to be revealed when you said, okay, when it gets a little darker. So I want to highlight here at the start, you're kind of setting the stage, and we are so sophisticated at kind of like talking around, and the context is important. So I appreciated you sharing with me there. But we kind of get to know ourselves when we let ourselves just get a little more in the muck of it. And so when you kind of let yourself drop into, I heard some frustration and blame. Like if you're only here if you can't even respond to something and I only get you for 2 hours, like, what are you really doing here? There's like a little, frustration there, and maybe a little drift back to victim of, how am I supposed to get this job done? And then I heard some hero. I'm willing to do that. I loved how you acknowledged that. Like I'll go the distance to fill in the gaps, keep stretching yourself. And then I heard the shift again back to victim of like, I'm tired. I'm really tired here. And great. So this is where I like to say, like, there's so much wisdom in that, in being in the muck. There's something about the way the group is organizing today that isn't working. And it's not working for you in particular, but it might not be working for the whole group and the program, right? So letting yourself have that experience and really tap into it's really important, because now we can find and explore willingness to shift, any agency you might be willing to claim around this issue. So checking in, Nate, are you willing to accept yourself for being below the line, having some real authentic feelings and experiences around this issue of the group not being able to get together?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what the response is to that.
Yeah, it might be a really new question here.
Can I just jump in there, Dolores?
Yeah.
What is it? What does that really mean to accept yourself for being below the line? Like, what would it really mean? Like, because if I'm Nate, and when I heard there, and if you ask me that question, I might not understand that question fully, or B, I may not really mean it when I say it.
Yeah, great. Yeah, good. These are common responses. What is it? What do you mean even? I don't even, put myself in that place of offering that, compassion back to myself. And so I don't know, it makes a lot of sense. And then number two is saying yes, but not really having the full experience. So kind of skipping over the fullness of that invitation of self-acceptance. So yeah, what we mean by it is it's a moment of kind of creating a little bit of space of being in the drama, being kind of fully immersed in it and believing this is reality right now, and kind of stepping and recognizing, oh, this is a reality I'm experiencing. And can I bring a little bit of self-compassion, acceptance for fear arising in my system. So tuning into awareness that there's fear in the system, which that alone might be quite novel, and then tuning into some self-acceptance for being a human that gets scared.
Sure. And if I could, I think, unpack a little bit of what JP's probably observing here too. I think of a specific event that happened a couple weeks ago where one of our coaches was teaching something in an open gym, or not an open gym, but like whatever, is working through something that we would never do. It was like contrary to everything that we believe in terms of, whatever. And that was just like, I literally in I'm standing there with a kid and I'm just like hunched over, like, oh my God. And this senior's like, Coach, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'll tell you when you graduate. Like, I just can't explain it, And so like but I observe in myself like this oscillation between, geez, I certainly recognize that and how I respond to that. And then it's like you get to a point where, well, this isn't real productive to stay here at the same time. And
Yeah.
so what can I do? What do I need to do differently? How do I need to perceive this differently? And maybe that's part of the process, is just there's the experience and recognition of that, but that's not very predictive, like I said. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah. This is often why we skip over acceptance and that moment of like, "Oh, this is nothing that I want to," when you were observing something and you had that thought of like, we don't teach that here. And I imagine reactivity ensued. You went below the line, just to use some of the tools we're discussing. Um, and and so what's entered the system, whenever we're below the line, there's fear present. And so, there's fear present, and then which isn't a problem, but there's fear in a sense of I've got to do something has to change. And and so yeah, we often jump into, okay, what can I do to shift this? Like how can I move it? So we like to pause for a moment around, can I accept that I'm getting scared? And the value of that is it's the antidote to fear, and it allows us to kind of relieve and release that, um, to give us space to then shift. But if we're overriding fear, we often it's going to keep running us kind of unconsciously. Yeah, and I'm just thinking of a example of, if a kid runs up to you and they're like, "I'm scared about something," and you say like, "Just we got to move on," but that isn't that fear is still going to be there, and that child isn't being supported. Versus if you say, "Oh gosh, what's going on?" Yeah, that makes sense. Some little validation and support of the experience they're having. I'm imagining you might imagine, you could try this on with students that you work with, and that
mhm.
just dissipates that validation, just supports you in releasing that so that you can then be available for what comes next, how to shift in a sustainable way. So with this experience with the group but not communicating well and not you're not getting the input you want, and maybe this pattern of you overexerting, can you Nate, are you willing to acknowledge fear present around that issue?
When you say, you feel afraid or you feel fear or you're scared, I don't know if that's an accessible word necessarily, because I think it takes us to some we have some preconceived ideas about what fear means. Like, I'm not feared for my life. I understand it's a similar response happening in our limbic system or whatever. But is there a different word maybe that coaches might,
Yeah,
recognize versus, well, I'm not scared. I'm not scared. I don't get scared.
yeah,
Like, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
Humans in general have kind of three core wants. We want control, security, and approval. And that's really innate within us. It's, evolutionary needs that we have, to be, approval. We want to be part of a tribe. Control. We want to be able to control our environment. And security. We want to know we're secure and not vulnerable. That we're going to be able to survive. So these are really core within us. And in any given issue, whenever we have reactivity, something shows up, it's not going the way we want, blame, complaining, heroing is all, part of the equation. Whenever that's happening, there's usually something at threat for us, a threat to control, approval, security. So in this instance, what do you notice? It could be multiple things at threat, but of control, security, approval, what feels most at threat, or which of those relate to this issue?
Yeah, probably control, I would say, in terms of, wanting to have a top-down philosophy here. And so when we have coaches at any level that are doing something different, it feels like I'm grasping at jello and I can't quite hold on to it.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So there's some control at threat. I have a way I want to do this. I want, it to be executed a certain way, and it just doesn't feel like that's even possible right now. Yeah. And so just that presence of control being at threat, that, you know, we can't exert that control over the situation. That's a synonym, I guess, maybe is the right word. Like it's a proxy to recognize like fear is the underlying thing, even if that doesn't feel as accessible.
And I think I would just add another question that I often ask is just what's at risk or what's at stake for you in this? And I
Mhm.
think that sometimes often leads people to recognize and be able to identify that fear, whether it's control, approval, or
Yeah.
security for sure.
Let's explore a shift move. You were saying kind of, what do I do next? Like now I've acknowledged this. Maybe I've explored whether acceptance is available or not. If that still feels, not available or a little bit, uh, yeah, murky, I'd say that great. So acceptance isn't available. That's okay. We're not really available to shift holistically and sustainably and kind of solve the issue, really handle it until we're accepting and fully facing everything that's happening within us. But we can still start to explore shift moves and kind of deepen our own awareness of our reactivity. So I
Mhm.
have another exercise we could introduce here, Nate, if you're game to keep playing.
Sure.
So the exercise is called Teach the Class. So you're a professor of your life, excellent at getting the results you're getting in life, and um, and I want to have you teach me as a student who wants to have that exact same experience of the team's not getting together, I'm not getting the input I want. How would I create that experience?
I'm just going to take guesses here. I don't know where exactly to go with this, but I think I have leaned into the one-on-one communication with each individual coach as a means of just trying to have dialogue. But at the same time, that probably short circuits the opportunity to, have multiple people on a group thread or a text thread, even if they don't respond. It silos people in a way that prevents them from collaborating with each other in my effort to go after what I want individually, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
JP and I've talked about this before. Like if it's not, if it's not a, like I think there's two sides to this coin. Like one, maybe this isn't as big a deal as it is to me, or you know what I mean? Like, so like you say, take this really seriously. Maybe there are ways to be functional without doing it the way we've always done it. And I haven't found those ways yet. And so that's possible.
Mhm.
I think the other side of it is if it is as important as I think it is, and not making it a mandatory or an expectation that comes with the job,
Mhm.
that would be another way that people could skate, And
Yeah.
here's another good one for me is like I'll give you an opportunity, and if you don't respond, then I'm like, okay, then I'll just talk to these two over here that will respond, and then just let it go. So
Oh, great. Yeah, great. I'm hearing some great ways. So, um, yeah, just to recap, so I'm hearing, yeah, have a vision. It should be the way it's always been. So, so then it's harder to be available for a new way of doing it. I'm hearing, yeah, you're going the extra mile to meet with everyone, and that's you could even think of that as like, yeah, it's taking away the opportunity for the group to come together, um, and not voice. This is the big one I hear is not voicing how important this is to you. So, making it a mandate or a part of the responsibility to have this position or, a requirement, and not, not voicing when your expectation doesn't get met. So you don't hear back from someone. And so you just, yeah, let it go. Great ways to kind of keep this persisting. Yeah. So there's some fun to this. I find this exercise really, really empowering, because what it does is it really invites you into your agency, into your, to take full responsibility for your impact. I suspect if you really let people know how important this is to you, how much you want to experience something different and voice your frustration, that's going to be really awakening to the group, a big wake up for how could we organize ourselves differently.
I noticed in Nate like a little bit like that point you made there near the end, which was, if this is really important to me, to not communicate that would continue to keep this issue going. And it was like kind of maybe a little bit of an aha for yourself, but I think it like so often maybe the narrative in our heads, because this is a common issue coaches face, is we with our athletes, they don't talk, they don't communicate back, is um well, I shouldn't have to say this, I've said it once and that's good enough. And so we're in more of a defense mode and an excuse mode
Mm,
and a blame mode. And just by flipping it, like to teach it, actually just kind of flipped it in his mind, flipped it in my mind, as well as I've been kind of walking through this. So I appreciate that activity, something we obviously even do, for ourselves reflectively, but also even with our players, at different
mhm.
points.
And that's what, yeah, the word shift, it is a pretty big mental shift to make that leap to say, wait a second, I've got a role here. I'm not at the effect of, my team and everything that's happening around me. I actually have a tremendous amount of agency as I move through the world.
Dolores, on like when we're talking about radical responsibility, this first commitment that's so important, it even defines, it's in your definition of leadership, is taking responsibility. And even as like Nate's working through a scenario there, like I think a lot of people might be going, how is this not self-blame? Or how is this not letting others off the hook for their responsibility? That would be my big question around radical responsibility. How is radical responsibility not self-blame, and how is it not letting other people off the hook?
Yeah, great questions. So and I'll answer the second one first. So one way to think about responsibility is instead of it being a pie that we all share a piece of. So in the issue of getting the staff together, everyone has a little slice of the pie. That they're responsible for. Instead, we like to say everyone has their own pie, 100% responsibility for their piece, their their pie. And so with that, that's how we can support ourselves and others in not uh, just letting people off the hook in a way, because when I'm when I'm exercising responsibility instead of blame, radical responsibility, I'm owning my part fully. I have a responsibility as the leader to bring the group together, let's say. And each person on the team has a responsibility, especially if Nate says, hey, this is a requirement. Then each person has a responsibility to fulfill that requirement. And or whatever the current agreement is among the group to be providing feedback. Maybe it's going to be asynchronously or however it's going to happen. There's some um, uh, responsibility each person holds their own 100%. So, and if we think back to the above the line, below the line, we would say that from below the line, we're committed to blaming. Where when we're on the drama triangle, we're kind of allocating who's got the blame, who's at fault. We often we blame others and the situation, but we often blame ourselves too. And in fact, that's where many people go when they attempt to take responsibility. They just start self-blaming. Um, and that is still a way of being below the line. When we shift above the line, there's kind of suddenly we just drop blame. It's like it really is like an energetic shift. You kind of let go of this idea of whose fault it is, and instead you're stepping into this sense of full agency. I have full capability of creating what I want. Each person has full capability of creating what they want. And so yeah, I really think of it as kind of laying down the arms of blaming myself, blaming others, and instead being with reality. Okay, there's frustration here. There's anger. You can feel anger from above the line. Um, it's not a problem that anger arises in the system. That's actually just a signal saying, "Stop. No, we should do something different here." And so yeah, to shift out of blame and into responsibility looks like laying down that whole monologue and kind of laying down the arms.
Yeah, and I kind of see it as the shift for me is like I'm on below the line. I'm not curious. I've
Yeah.
just made judgments. I've placed fault, and there's nothing else to learn, right? I just know, well, that's it. Whereas when I'm above the line with responsibility, I'm actually still curious. I'm asking questions. To your point, where you asked a question, Nate, earlier around responsibility, it's like, what have I done to create these conditions or to perpetuate this problem in my life, right? Dolores, just as we're kind of wrapping up here, I think one of the big things that coaches struggle sometimes with some of these ideas is that it's like, okay, so I get it. I'm below the line. What do I do now? Or what, I'm angry. Okay, what do I do now? Like, we always like these protocols, these actionable things. And yet I would just offer like my work around this space, somatic work, the above the line, below the line type stuff with the conscious leadership and other similar tools and frameworks, is that sometimes just awareness is and self acceptance is really all we need in many cases to be able to experience those shifts
Yeah.
and to really um like, it's just so powerful and transformational in that. And
Yeah.
so I really just offer that to a lot of the coaches, because I think sometimes we're like, okay, yeah, so we know these things, but now what? And it's just really, really important just to be able to become aware and not become caught up in the stories that we're telling. I'm curious, just kind of to kind of get you out the door here, is just this work that you've been doing since you were in the startup world, and now you've kind of moved in with your work with the Conscious Leadership Group. What has been so significant for you personally
Mm.
in doing this work? How has this changed your life?
Yeah. Great question. Um, yeah, I yeah, I want to underscore something you said about like the whole game here is in raised awareness and self-acceptance. That practice on those 2 points is it supports the shift almost incidentally. And so there are all these different tools and ways we can support shifting and cultivate that skill within ourselves. But um, that's the whole game, awareness and acceptance. So you're spot on with that. Um, and for me personally, yeah, there are a couple things come to mind. One is like a tremendous amount of internal freedom. So all this raised awareness and acceptance supports um, I can stay more present in a number of situations, and it's like the things that I used to get triggered about or really hooked on, a lot of them have fallen away. And and so with that, there's a moment actually there's a moment in my journey of like increased boredom, like, well, what now? I don't have all my dramas. And and then with that, there's all this added creative energy, available creative energy that can be applied in any number of ways. So there's a freedom internally, freedom to stay present. There's a kind of a sense of increased aliveness and yeah, availability for joy and creative acts. So yeah, those are a few of the things. It's definitely been a journey, and it takes um it takes a couple years to really get to know all the parts internally, below the line and go spelunking in that space. But with it, on the other side of it, there's just a tremendous amount of and along the way, yeah, freedom and aliveness.
Well, thanks so much, Dolores, for sharing that, and for Nate, joining in and playing along here today. I'm going to obviously recommend everybody check out the book, 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership. But if there's one place they should go to on the internet, where should they check you all out?
Yeah, you can find us at conscious.is. That's probably a great starting point. We have a tremendous amount of resources on our website, and yeah, that I'd say start there.
Yeah, I love those resources. I use them in my coaching, but I also use them for some self-reflection tools, and especially
Mhm.
as I've been going through the book the second time here. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, JP. Thank you, Nate. It was a pleasure.
All right, that's it for our conversation with Dolores Stevens. Like I said, I highly recommend the book. It's an incredible framework to help you grow your awareness as a leader and to make some of these shifts, right? All 15 of these commitments they discuss in the book are shift moves that you can make to get back above the line. Thanks for tuning in to the Coaching Culture Podcast. If you found this episode valuable, we'd love for you to leave a review. But most of all, share it with others. Share it with athletes, fellow coaches, friends. These episodes, we really believe, and we've experienced this in our work and hearing from others out there, that they're great conversation starters. So please be sure to share, and also don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.